What if the only way to conquer fear was to cook it? In this story, a lone human survives by doing the unthinkable, feasting on the galaxy's deadliest predator. But what begins as raw survival quickly spirals into a doctrine that changes the fate of entire worlds. Love forged in tactical blood. A doctrine built on flame and flesh. And a new predator order rising not from evolution, but from integration. Can fear truly be digested? Can two enemies become one heartbeat strong enough to train the stars? Stay with us, and question everything you thought you knew about strength, survival, and what it means to love beyond species. This is The New Predators, exclusively on the Alien Storyverse. The twin suns of Veritas hung low in the sky, casting copper and crimson beams across a fractured landscape that had never known mercy. Wind did not howl here, it hissed, sliding across razor-edged stone, carrying the scent of sulfur and something deeper, darker, like regret baked into the soil. This planet did not welcome life. It tested it. Perched on the jagged remains of a broken cliff, a solitary man crouched beside the smoking carcass of a beast that looked as if it had come from the edge of hell itself. Scales like volcanic glass. Eyes like dried blood. Teeth curved backward not for chewing, but for locking prey in eternal silence. And yet, it was dead. And he was eating it. He tore a chunk of flesh from the creature's limb, still steaming from fire-charred muscle, sinking his teeth into it with the detached calm of a man who had long ceased asking permission from the universe. Grease and dark blood slicked his chin. His eyes did not blink. They calculated. The fire crackled. Not cheerfully, but hungrily, like it, too, desired to devour something that had once been feared. He chewed slowly. Deliberately. Savoring. As if the taste itself mattered less than the act. That moment, frozen in time, would later become one of the most controversial visual transmissions in xenological history. For the people of Veritas, the creature he feasted upon was not merely dangerous. It was sacred. The apex predator of their world. The Aveth'kara. Untouchable. Unkillable. Born from myth and nightmare. But the human had not only killed it. He cooked it. He made it a meal. From the edge of a shattered ridge, hidden in a shimmer field of Nixon cloaking tech, another presence watched. She had come as an observer, an officer assigned by the Interplanetary Council to deliver rations and ensure the survival of Earth's liaison on this death world. Her mission was diplomatic, clinical. She had been trained to assess, not to feel. But what she saw below ignited a surge of emotion she could not name, part horror, part fascination, part something ancient. The human, unarmored, bleeding from a gash across his cheek, surrounded by the fading smoke of violence, lifted the meat toward the firelight, inspecting it like an artist evaluating his brush stroke. She activated her translator, but no words came. For a moment, the protocol broke. The act was too primal. What he had done wasn't just survival. It was declaration. I fear nothing you fear. I will eat what you worship. To her people, the Aveth'kara were revered even in death. Their remains were left untouched. To see a human reduce it to food broke a dozen codes of cultural preservation. And yet, it was not ignorance. It was intent. A knowing, sharpened rebellion. And that is where the true power of the moment lived. Because fear, real fear, is not just a physiological reaction. It is a language, a ritual, a hierarchy of meaning. On Veritas, the Aveth'kara were not feared because they killed. They were feared because they reminded every living thing that some truths cannot be fought. Until now. Dr. Valen Thorne, renowned xenopsychologist, would later write in his infamous essay The Apex Myth, when evolution becomes ritual. The human act of consuming an apex predator is not mere barbarism, it is cultural predation. It is the ultimate assertion of cognitive dominance. When humans eat what others fear, they are not just surviving, they are rewiring the planet's social DNA. The man in the firelight, whose name the locals would not know for weeks, did more than cook a beast. He redefined the food chain not with a speech, not with a treaty, but with his teeth. And that is where the story begins, not with a war, or a prophecy, or a galactic threat, but with a meal. A forbidden one. A bite that said, "I do not fear your gods." But why did he do it? This is where the tale deepens. For this was no ordinary human. Lieutenant Rion, lone scout, survivalist, unofficial myth breaker, had arrived on Veritas not to observe, but to challenge. His file, redacted even within Earth's own command chain, marked him as non-conventional threat response. In simpler terms, when diplomacy failed, they sent the predator in. He had not planned to kill the Aveth'kara that night. But when it ambushed him, silent as starlight, swift as shadow, he reacted the only way a man raised in the deserts of Australia knew how. He killed, then cooked. The logic was simple. In his words, recorded later: "If it's trying to eat me, it's fair game. And if I win, I eat it." There is a paradox to the human psyche often missed by alien intelligences. Unlike most species, humans do not revere apex predators with fear. They challenge them. They hunt them. And when victorious, they mount their heads or grill their flesh. It is not a matter of necessity. It is identity. A species that evolved to chase antelope to exhaustion has, in its blood, a defiance older than language. And it is this defiance that Veritas had never seen. Until now. In that opening act, one human, one beast, one fire, something shifted in the biology of fear. It no longer flowed downward. It swirled. The Nixon observer, watching from above, whispered to her command relay. The human, he is consuming dominance. He is not surviving. He is asserting. Her voice trembled. Not from disgust. From awe. For what she was witnessing was not an act of barbarism, but the birth of a new doctrine, one that would spread across worlds. Fear is not to be obeyed. Fear is to be hunted. Fear is to be digested. And for the first time in generations, the apex predator of Veritas had become dinner. She did not descend at first. She simply watched. From the silvered veil of her cloaked observation post, floating just above the eroded stone cliffs of Veritas, she remained motionless except for the silent dilation of her pupils. Her eyes, genetically refined for low-light starlight reading, adjusted not to the planet's radiation but to something rarer: disbelief. The human had not merely slain a god beast. He had dared to consume it. Aveth'kara Vaishal, High Lieutenant of the Nixon Ecological Harmony Corps, was trained to remain neutral. She had studied over 40 planetary cultures, absorbed entire biosphere indexes, mastered diplomacy in 12 languages including 2 pheromone-based dialects. Yet no training in her lineage had prepared her for the sight below. Her breath slowed. Her thoughts fractured. Because this wasn't just a survivalist eating a carcass. This was ideological heresy wrapped in muscle and firelight. To the Nixon, the Aveth'kara were not merely apex predators. They were echoes of a deeper memory, a time when their own ancestors lived in fear until they learned to reverently step aside. Over thousands of cycles, the species had formed a silent truce: the predators would not be hunted, and the sentient would not challenge their dominion. Coexistence, through reverence. Fear was not something to overcome, it was a pillar. A philosophy. A sacred instinct. A guiding myth. But this human, he looked at that myth and chose to digest it. The translator on her shoulder clicked twice before catching his words. Tastes like smoked buffalo and something angrier. And then he laughed. Laughed. Aveth'kara flinched. The sound vibrated in her chest cavity, too loud, too warm. It was not mockery. It was joy. Unshackled. Untranslated. The difference struck her harder than the death of the creature. In Nixon culture, even laughter was bound by context and frequency, a means of maintaining internal equilibrium. But this man had no reverence. No hesitation. He enjoyed what terrified entire generations. Her shuttle descended silently, phasing into visibility as its systems responded to her subconscious desire for proximity. Her boots touched Veritas soil for the first time. And immediately, everything felt wrong. The air was thick, electric, heavy with the scent of cooked predator and human sweat. The fire still danced, mocking her instincts. Sparks rose like ghost lights around him. He didn't look up at first. He simply reached for another bone and stripped the meat clean with practiced, primitive ease. Then his eyes met hers. Not predatory. Not even curious. But amused. Dinner, he asked. Plenty to go around. She stared at the carcass, her lips parting in silent protest. The blackened leg, still dripping with marrow. The teeth, cracked open by blunt force trauma. She recognized the signs. He had gone toe-to-toe with the beast. Not from afar. Not with drones. He had fought it. Her voice, when it came, was filtered through the translator in a whisper. That is a shadow warden. She couldn't even say its name without trembling. The term translated poorly. Shadow Stalker was what the council had allowed the humans to call it. But in her people's language, it meant sentinel of the old fear, a creature so enshrined in their ancestral DNA that entire villages fasted upon seeing one in the wild. And he had eaten it like smoked ribs. He chuckled again, dusting his hands against his torn black underarmor. Ugly bastard tried to gut me. I returned the favor. There was no pride in his voice. No cruelty. Only normalcy. That, more than anything, shook her. Because the most terrifying predator was not the one who roared. It was the one who felt nothing while devouring the thing you prayed to. She stepped closer. Her boots crunched on fractured bone. Something within her twitched. A cultural nerve long buried. Her gaze drifted over his body, scraped, bruised, wounded, but alive. Dominant. And in that moment, something deeper cracked, not just inside her, but within the doctrine she had served her whole life. What if fear wasn't sacred? What if fear was merely another flavor? Across the firelight, the human watched her carefully. He wasn't flirting. He was studying. Predator to predator. You're not used to seeing prey become dinner, are you? She answered without knowing why. We do not hunt what we fear. We avoid. We protect balance. His eyebrow lifted. That sounds a lot like surrender. Surrender. The word was like acid in her ears. But was it? She thought of her people, how they had mapped fear into every structure, every law, every song. How temples were built not to worship courage, but to commemorate avoidance. How apex predators had become not threats to be managed but icons to be preserved, even as they claimed more territory each season. Maybe he wasn't the anomaly. Maybe they were. Could it be that the higher a species evolved, the more it armored itself against its own fears. Layer upon layer of logic, ritual, etiquette designed not to overcome terror but to mask it? What if the human wasn't barbaric? What if he was free? As the fire crackled and meat sizzled, the theory took root. The human did not revere fear. He hunted it. And in doing so, he dismantled an entire psychological architecture without saying a word. Her obsession began not with attraction, but with envy. She wanted to feel that hunger not for flesh, but for freedom from hierarchy. She wanted to see fear, and instead of kneeling, take a bite. The stars shifted overhead. The constellations of Veritas realigned as they always did, but something in her perception had broken and reformed. And it would never align the same again. Because now she had seen it. The future does not belong to the species who fear the most. It belongs to the one who learns to chew through it. The storm did not arrive like weather. It arrived like memory and ancient trauma stitched into the sky, unwinding above them with slow, sentient wrath. The horizon fractured in luminous green pulses, and from the distant north, the first ripple of pressure flattened the strange violet grass into shivering submission. The fire snapped, then bowed as if recognizing something older than fire itself. Neither of them spoke, but both had already moved. The human Rion stood with quiet calculation, body tensing not from fear but from something deeper, familiarity. The alien Aveth'kara felt it too, in her bones, in the tremble of the planet beneath her feet. Not just the storm. Something else moved through the land. The shadows no longer stayed silent. From the tree-lean, glowing eyes emerged 6, then 10, then dozens. Slitted, furious, layered in intelligence and rage. A pack. A convergence. The Aveth'kara had come for their dead. They had followed the scent of blood and fire and dominance, and they brought judgment. Rion didn't flinch. His voice, low and mechanical from years of survival training, activated a beacon embedded beneath his collarbone. A dome-shaped shelter blinked to life beside a collapsed ridge, nearly camouflaged against the charred rocks. He turned to her, hand extended not as a commander, not as a man but as something simpler, a living being asking for a shared survival. Move. She did. Without thought. Her body obeyed before her mind caught up. The run was short, but it rewrote time. Wind slashed across their faces, filled with acidic rain that hissed as it struck metal and skin. Behind them, the Aveth'kara charged not in chaos, but in formation, as if some new intelligence had awoken in them. The earth shook. The storm screamed. They reached the shelter in synchronized stride. He shoved her inside with a fluid, brutal grace just as the first beast lunged. Its claws met his forearm, tearing through old wounds, but his knife, ancient and scorched from a dozen battles, found the creature's eye. It collapsed mid-roar, becoming a wall of meat that blocked its kin. He dove in, slammed the seal. The metal groaned but held. Then, silence. Not outside. Inside. They stood inches apart in a chamber meant for one. The emergency lights glowed soft amber. Her breathing came in stuttered waves, his chest rose in steady, jagged rhythm. The scent of scorched hair, alien blood, ozone, and fire still clung to them. Her hand trembled. He noticed. But he didn't speak to it. He simply offered a canister of water. She took it, touched only briefly his fingers, and in that brush 1,000 unspoken thoughts collided. Because inside this fragile dome, something else had awakened. Not safety. Compression. There is a phenomenon known in human psychology, proximity bonding under duress. Soldiers trapped in combat zones. Astronauts lost in orbital drift. Survivors sharing the last breathable air. It is not romantic. It is biological. When death waits outside, the body begins to crave life inside, in the scent of another's breath, in the sound of another's heartbeat, in the pressure of shared heat. But for Aveth'kara, this was not instinct. This was heresy. Her species had evolved under principles of spatial sanctity. Emotional regulation was a public virtue. Touch, especially in combat proximity, was reserved for the wounded or the dying. But here, inches from a creature who had killed a god beast and dared to offer her its meat, she found her thoughts unraveling. Not in panic. In reconstruction. He studied her not like prey, but like paradox. A woman trained to observe but not react. A warrior taught reverence but now pressed against the source of defilement. And yet, she didn't withdraw. Why? Because biology, under the right pressure, rewrites itself. Their bodies so different in origin reacted the same. Sweat crystallized in the cool shelter air. Her skin, laced with dermal memory receptors, recorded the chemical residue on his collar: adrenaline, old blood, dried smoke. He smelled like violence and survival. He smelled like permission. He broke the silence first, not with a question, but with a statement. "You're not trembling from the cold?" She blinked. "It's not fear," she answered, voice barely audible, "it's recognition." He tilted his head, not smug, but intrigued. "Of what?" She looked at him, then truly looked. Past the wounds. Past the firelight. Past the species divide. And the answer came not as theory, but as truth. "You remind me of what we once were, before we chose to evolve by forgetting." For generations, the Nixon had purged their violent past. They built temples to patience, not power. They revered fear as sacred because they believed that in honoring it, they might escape its grip. But in doing so, they had also shed their primal intuition, buried it beneath layers of harmony and guilt. Yet here, in the eye of the storm, beside the creature they had feared for centuries, stood a human who had consumed that fear and now offered no apologies for being alive. The shelter lights dimmed as the backup grid activated. Outside, the howls rose again, circling, searching. But within, the dome was still. She felt his breath before she realized how close they were. Her fingers, without instruction, hovered near his shoulder, brushing the torn fabric where his wounds still bled in quiet defiance. And in that moment, proximity ceased to be coincidence. It became revelation. This was not just two bodies seeking shelter. This was two doctrines collapsing into one room. One built on reverence. One built on refusal. And both suddenly, in orbit of each other. She did not kiss him. Not yet. That ritual, even in its temptation, belonged to another chapter. But what she did do, what rewrote the sacred scripts of her ancestors, was speak the forbidden. "You are dangerous, and that is why I feel safe." Outside, the storm tore the sky open. The predators clawed against walls forged in Terran alloy. But within, something more ancient was occurring, the realignment of instinct. Fear had not died. It had been invited in. Tamed not by worship, but by intimacy. The flesh sizzled not with defeat, but with reclamation. Inside the shelter, sealed against the acid breath of the storm and the seething hunger of the pack outside, the air grew heavy with a scent older than logic, burning protein, charring sinew, the slow roasting of something once invincible. The crackling fat of the Azak raw leg filled the cramped dome with the aroma of heresy. But Rion did not flinch. He fed the flames, rotated the spit with mechanical precision, and checked the heat with his bare hand, welcoming the sting as if the pain confirmed something righteous. Aveth'kara sat opposite him, still cloaked in the armored restraint of her people, but her eyes betrayed her. They followed the rise and fall of the fire, traced the darkened outlines of muscle blistering under flame, and stopped on his hands, scarred, methodical, unfazed. Those hands had held a blade in one breath and carved the haunch of sacred predator in the next. And now, they prepared it like a ritual offering not to gods, but to perception. He looked up, met her gaze, and then spoke the unthinkable. "Fear's only a weapon if you never chew on it." The words didn't translate cleanly. The Nixon tongue had no concept of chewing fear. Fear was elemental, immutable. But something in the way he said it, the way he skewered the flesh and let the marrow hiss and spit in open defiance, told her that this was not just sustenance. It was strategy. To the Nixon mind, trauma was stored collectively, encoded into social doctrine, passed down as sacred memory. Fearful things were given names, distance, even shrines. To challenge that memory was not bravery. It was madness. But Rion had weaponized madness. He had taken the apex trauma of this world, the predator of myths, of nursery warnings, of instinctive night terrors, and made it smell like lunch. She could barely believe what her senses were confirming. The leg was cut clean, muscle stripped from tendon, bone split with surgical brutality. He had disassembled the creature the same way her ancestors had dissected symbols, with intention. But this time, it wasn't for knowledge. It was for dominance. And she realized something terrifying. He wasn't just feeding his body. He was feeding the room. The act was contagious. Not biologically, but psychologically. Every second she sat in that scent, every flick of flame, every shift of caramelized predator fat unwrote generations of encoded deference. Her hands began to unclench. Her breathing slowed. Her gaze dropped, not in shame, but in surrender. Not to him. To the idea. "Why?" she finally asked, voice low, rough. "Why eat it?" He didn't answer immediately. He sliced a sliver of meat, held it to the light, then offered it to her, not with ceremony, not with arrogance. Just a gesture. A chance. A crack in the monolith of fear. She didn't take it. But she didn't look away. Then he spoke, slow, deliberate. "Because when you eat what hunts you, it stops being the hunter." Her pulse flickered. Not with danger. With resonance. She had studied Terran history. She had seen the images, early hominids painting lions on cave walls beside fire pits lined with bones. Viking warriors wearing bear pelts taken from beasts they had slain. Pacific Islanders spoiling the hearts of sharks as part of coming-of-age rites. Even in modern Earth cultures, culinary dominance persisted: crocodile steaks, lion jerky, tiger wine. Always with the same subtext: this could kill me, so I must consume it to prove it doesn't own me. On Veritas, the Aveth'kara had never been hunted. Not because they were sacred. Because they were undefeated. And every generation that avoided them only added more weight to their shadow. But now that shadow had been dismembered, skinned, marinated. Its heart had been pierced. Its flesh turned into flavor. Aveth'kara couldn't breathe for a moment. The shelter no longer smelled like fear. It smelled like reprogramming. And the truth hit her in a single, savage realization. Fear is a chemical. And chemicals can be rewritten. Just as Pavlov trained dogs to salivate at bells, so too could fear be conditioned. If they all could learn to associate the scent of a Zakral with nourishment instead of terror, then the power of that predator would fracture. If they could see the beast's bones boiled into broth, its hide turned into thermal cloth, its teeth filed into spear tips, then the myth of its supremacy would collapse. Not through war. Through assimilation. Rion bit into the cooked meat again and spoke between chews, his tone casual, but every syllable a sledgehammer. You know what happens when a lion sees a man eating another lion? It doesn't roar. It recalculates. Her voice broke without warning. You're recalibrating this world's fear map. He looked up. Smiled. Not just this world. The meaning rooted itself in her gut. This wasn't about nutrition. It was about message transmission. By turning trauma into a tactic, he wasn't just surviving Veritas. He was broadcasting a new hierarchy, one that declared no predator was too sacred to become supper. And the most dangerous part? It worked. Because deep in her brainstem, beyond the logic centers and diplomatic training, something old stirred. Some ancient, primal fragment of her species past, felt hungry. She had been sent to supervise him. Not to learn from him. Her assignment, according to the diplomatic dispatches encrypted in sapphire logic across the Nixon military network, was clear: observe the human survivalist, catalog behavioral anomalies, prevent unnecessary escalation with native fauna, and above all ensure that Earth's liaison did not violate planetary sanctity. Now she stood behind him, taking notes not for command, but for herself. The fire had burned down to glowing red veins in the stone ring. The air outside still reeked faintly of ozone and ash, but the predators had retreated. What remained was the sound of a world, listening. The forest didn't rustle. The wind didn't howl. Even the insect equivalents chitinus, bone-pale things that clung to trees like cracked porcelain, had quieted. Rion moved like water around the remnants of the camp, gathering tools, repurposing debris, reinforcing perimeter lines with bone fragments of the creature he had slain. He worked in silence, but every movement held intent, precision, and a kind of wild logic that defied protocol. His hands knew. His eyes assessed threats without scanning gear. His back remained exposed, not out of arrogance, but because his instincts had replaced technology. Aveth'kara watched. Not with curiosity, but with recalibration. Because at some point between the flames and the fight, between the bite of predator flesh and the soft hum of shared shelter walls, her purpose had changed. She no longer observed. She followed. Not blindly. Not in worship. But in that rare, irreducible gravitational shift where the mentee recognizes the limits of their own design. He did not quote doctrine. He did not lecture. But he taught. He taught with blood. With silence. With the way he tilted his head before choosing where to step, reading terrain like a language she'd forgotten. With how he stripped a plant of its barbed skin to reveal moisture-rich pulp beneath. With how he carved a spear from a collapsed strut and taught her, without speaking, to use its weight rather than fight it. And she learned. Not reluctantly. Desperately. She mimicked his stances. Adjusted her grip. Matched her breath to his rhythm. And when she failed, when her blade glanced off a creature's carapace rather than splitting the joint, he didn't correct her. He simply did it again. Showed. Moved. Trusted her to absorb. Her pride, once a fortress, began to crumble into something more adaptable. Because in the space between reverence and rebellion, she had found evolution. It was not the first time this reversal had happened in history. Earth's records were filled with echoes of it. Roman scholars secretly studying the tactics of Celtic raiders. French generals adopting guerrilla tactics from uncivilized African tribes. Japanese martial artists relearning raw instinct from street fighters. Time and again, the advanced had turned to the primal because instinct, when sharpened by necessity, becomes a form of intelligence that no system can replicate. The Nixon had forgotten that. Their civilization, in its pursuit of elegance and harmony, had filed away its teeth. They had replaced heat of battle decisions with algorithms. Replaced warrior rights with political moderation. They had grown so advanced that the raw algorithm of survival, the one encoded in every breath of Rion's movement, felt alien to them. And perhaps, it was. She remembered what her old mentor had once said, during their final assessment on the Academy Sky Dome. Civilization does not mean shedding the savage. It means teaching it when to wake. But her people had let the savage sleep too long. And now, faced with a man who carried his instincts like a blade across his spine, she understood why evolution needed to be interrupted. Because sometimes, when a culture grows too tall, it forgets how to crawl. Rion crouched near a thicket of glowing fungal pods, testing for heat signatures with the back of his hand. He tilted his chin toward her, gesturing silently. She knelt beside him. Mimicked the movement. Felt the warmth not just of the spores, but of something deeper, the transfer of method. Not knowledge. Not theory. But praxis born in flesh and nerve. He passed her a tool, something he had crafted from the bone of the predator. It was ugly. Uneven. Brutally functional. She took it. Not because she needed it, but because accepting it meant accepting that her hands could still learn new things. And when she rose, spear in hand, posture lowered to match his, she felt no humiliation. Only clarity. The mentor had become the student. The observer had become the emulation. The theory had given way to blood. And the most mysterious part was how natural it felt. This was not regression. This was integration. Because true warriors, no matter their species, do not measure strength by how refined their training is. They measure it by how quickly they can adapt when their paradigm is broken. And Rion broke paradigms with every footstep. The kill zone was drawn in ash and silence. No borders. No digital perimeter. Just instinct mapped in the way Rion paused before choosing a ridge, in the slight shift of his weight when the wind carried unfamiliar vibrations, in the way his pupils narrowed not from light, but from calculation. Aveth'kara followed at his 6. Not because she needed to. Because she wanted to. Because her body, attuned now to the rhythm of his movement, found efficiency in its mimicry. She had begun to breathe with him, inhale when he paused, exhale when he advanced. They did not speak. They sensed. Above them, the storm had passed, but the world had not calmed. Veritas never truly slept. Its predators simply shifted their stalking hours. And in the fog that curled through the fanged forest of obsidian trees, something larger than strategy hung between them. The bond. It hadn't been formed by conversation or ceremony. It had been etched in sweat and blood and shared pulses beneath storm-sealed steel. It had evolved between knife strikes and mutual cover fire, in the way she threw her body across his when the cliff collapsed, in the way he didn't hesitate to cauterize her leg wound with glowing plasma coil, his hand trembling only after the danger had passed. That was how trust is forged, not in warmth, but in urgency. They had been tracking the remaining members of the Predator pack for 3 days. The Azakral were testing them, adapting. Smarter. Quieter. The kills had become more surgical, the ambushes more timed. What had once been wild now moved like tactics. Something inside them was learning. Rion responded the only way he knew how. He outlearned them faster. He built traps using their own behavior against them. Created noise signatures to lure them into terrain disadvantages. Timed their footfalls. Predicted deviation paths from wounded pack logic. And Aveth'kara, she learned the rhythm of his mind like a second heartbeat. She began to anticipate his decisions not as a soldier trained in war councils, but as a creature of parallel survival. And in those moments when she caught his glance before he signaled, when she moved to flank before he needed to ask something beneath the tactical coordination shifted. It was subtle at first. The way her fingers lingered an extra second when passing him a sharpened blade. The way he watched her recalibrate the traps with quiet pride. The way their bodies brushed in tight corridors and neither moved away. It wasn't softness. It was recognition. Because adrenaline, when bound to shared purpose, morphs into something ancient. And when it flows alongside oxytocin released through proximity, synchronized danger, trust under fire, even the most foreign bodies recognize each other as sanctuary. This is why so many bonds forged in war outlast peace. Why soldiers, alien or human, form attachments that bypass language. Not because love is born in combat, but because combat removes everything that is not love. They made camp at the edge of a collapsed ravine. Scouting reports indicated it was once a nesting path for the first wave of Azakral. Now, only the bones remained, calcified remains twisted like ivory roots, a testament to evolution devouring itself. Rion sat with one knee raised, carving new teeth into a jagged spear. Aveth'kara crouched nearby, sharpening a blade using one of the obsidian quills from the dead predator's spine. Their weapons, once foreign, were now hybrid creations, each etched with elements from both worlds. The silence between them was not empty. It was thick. She broke it. "You're bleeding again." He didn't look up. "Better out than in." She stood, walked over, and without permission, knelt behind him. Her hands, alien, gloved, trained for battlefield diagnostics, lifted the fabric at his side. The wound was shallow, reopened by movement. She cleaned it with thermal gel. He flinched, not from pain, but from contact. She paused. Her hands resting lightly on the muscle along his ribs. She could feel his breath, measured, restrained, but quickening. Then he turned. And for the first time, looked at her not through the filter of tactics or duty, but as a man seeing a woman who had stood beside him in every moment where death whispered. Their faces were close. The moment long. She spoke without moving her mouth. Her voice dropped in register, almost guttural. In Nixon tradition, battle-born intimacy is not taboo. It is sacred. When the blood of one protects the breath of another, we are bonded beyond language. His eyes flickered. His voice came low, hoarse. On Earth, we call it the foxhole effect. People fall for the ones who bleed beside them. Do you? He didn't answer with words. The kiss was not soft. It was a collision of blood memory and repressed evolution. It tasted like sweat and ozone, tasted of adrenaline left unresolved and the unspoken truth that no peaceful day could ever breed something this real. And when they pulled away, eyes still locked, the war outside didn't vanish. It simply became a chamber, a world where two instincts had aligned. That night, they lay together not to escape fear but to share it. To wrap it around themselves like armor woven in pulse and touch. And outside the camp, in the dark of bone-thorn trees, the predators moved, but slower. Because something had shifted. Something ancient. Something they could smell. Something they feared. Not the blades. Not the traps. But the bond. Because predators know when two hunters become one, the pack must change tactics, or die. The first time Aveth'kara stood before her own people and lifted the blood-polished bone of a slain Xenoplanet into the air, no one spoke. No one moved. The warriors of the Nixon First Guard, the most disciplined strike unit on the planet, had gathered to witness what the Command Council described as an experimental doctrine review. But what they saw that day was not theory. It was conversion. The bone glistened not because it was decorated, but because it had been cooked. She held it like a relic. And for her people, raised to revere the predator as untouchable myth, the act was an affront so profound it made the silence vibrate with discomfort. Then Rion stepped forward. He wore no rank. No uniform. Only a vest made from the cured hide of the creature he had once slain with nothing but instinct and blade. His hands were ungloved. His eyes, steady. There was no arrogance in his voice. Only certainty. You've been told to fear what cannot be outmatched. I'm here to show you how to digest it. He did not preach. He demonstrated. He had set up the training ground to mimic Xenoplanet hunting paths, tight, spiraled ambush points marked with pheromone trails. The Nixon trainees, eyes sharp but cautious, moved through it as they always had, wary, reactive, defending first, then retreating when overwhelmed. Rion stopped them. You're not here to survive. You're here to interrupt the predator's narrative. He showed them how to manipulate scent rather than avoid it. How to mimic fear signals to bait attacks. How to use the topography not as refuge but as mirrors, places where the predator sees a distorted version of its own behavior reflected back. He taught them to hunt with their heartbeat. Not by suppressing fear, but by training it to sharpen instead of paralyze. Fear, he explained, is not the enemy. Fear is the engine. Fear is just a misfired signal waiting to be given new instruction. He made them eat. Not for nourishment. For recalibration. The meat of the beast, served hot, bone marrow split, seasoned only with salt and memory. At first, some refused. But when Aveth'kara stepped forward, armor off, hands bare, and took the first bite without blinking, something cracked in the formation. One followed. Then another. Until 22 warriors consumed what their ancestors would not even name aloud. That day marked the first node in a new survival web. Not a doctrine written in scrolls. A doctrine transmitted through muscle, meal, and mirror neuron. In the weeks that followed, more units requested the training. What began as whispers became requests. What began as ritual became strategy. And everywhere the training spread, so did the creed. Don't just defeat fear. Consume it. Break it down. Make it part of your bloodstream. So when it returns, it doesn't recognize you anymore. The most radical shift came not in technique, but in psychology. The warriors, once trained to anticipate loss and minimize damage, began to calculate dominance arcs. They no longer asked, "How do we survive the predator?" They asked, "How does the predator unravel when hunted by those it once ruled?" And the results were unstoppable. Kill zones were no longer last resorts. They became staging grounds. Defensive traps became bait rituals, places designed to invite attack under controlled thresholds. The Xenoplanet responded as expected. They grew erratic. Unstable. They evolved too, but always one step behind. Their prey had turned spectral, no longer retreating, but circling. Not afraid. But fascinated. Rion observed from afar, rarely interfering. he let Aveth'kara lead the expansions. She had become not just a translator of Terran method, but a prophet of predatory inversion. Her speeches, though rare, echoed in the warrior halls of Nixon settlements. Our ancestors taught us that fear keeps us wise. But we forgot that wisdom without courage becomes stagnation. Today, we eat not because we hunger, but because we remember what it means to taste the unknown, and not flinch. In private, she asked him once, "Why does it work? Why does consuming the predator collapse the fear?" His answer was quiet, but it anchored the entire doctrine. Because when you eat something that terrifies you, it no longer lives outside you. It loses its shape. It loses its agency. You either become what you fear, or you become what fear fears. And therein lay the truth. This doctrine was not about superiority. It was about transcendence. About dismantling the scaffolding of fear that kept cultures obedient to threats that were only kings by consensus. Civilizations had always been haunted by the monsters they refused to confront. Some worshipped them. Some avoided them. But the most revolutionary act was to consume them without apology. This was not evolution. It was revolution in digestion. The atmosphere of Earth struck her like a forgotten lullaby, familiar in density, breathable in composition, yet thick with noise. Not the noise of danger, but of expectation. Tre dat kong gam gu nu veritas. No lang ne. An hung su im lang I kong hein lan no fansit. Aveth'kara stepped from the ramp of the descent ship, clad in hybrid armor, a mixture of Nixon tactical weave and earth-forged ballistic fiber. On her hip, a ceremonial blade carved from the femur of the last Azak Ral she'd hunted. At her side, Rion Cade walked with calm familiarity, but beneath his casual gait, his muscles readied for recoil, not from battle, but from politics. They had returned not as soldier and observer, but as something unclassifiable. Earth's military complex, ever efficient, had already formed a semicircle of command tiers around the landing platform. Generals, analysts, cultural liaisons. None spoke as the two approached. They didn't need to. Their faces human, and not revealed enough, confusion, unease, veiled disdain. The data they had received did not match the living contradiction before them. They had expected reports. They got a bond. They had expected strategy. They got a love forged in violence. They had expected hierarchy. They got a predator, with a partner. One of the younger colonels whispered too loud. "Is that thing wearing our tech?" Aveth'kara heard. She turned her head with the precision of a sniper locking aim, her violet eyes shimmering under the light of Earth's sun. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Rion did. "She's not wearing your tech." She refined it. The air tightened. Rion stepped forward, his voice cool but etched. "This is Lieutenant Aveth'kara. Decorated. Effective. And the reason our joint doctrine now has a 98% survival rate on 3 death-class worlds. You can call her thing again if you're ready to bleed in front of her." No one spoke. Because what truly disturbed them wasn't the alien. It was what she represented. Not a threat. Not an outsider. But change. She had survived. Evolved. Blended. She had made Earth's weapons more deadly, not by numbers, but by instinct. And worse still, she had done so not through submission, but through partnership. In her presence, their systems felt obsolete. Their classifications, us versus them, human versus alien, observer versus subject, became dust in the wake of her calm gaze. Later that day, in the debriefing chamber carved from glass, steel and bureaucracy, she stood before the council. No translator. No script. Just her voice, deliberate and sharpened by every memory burned into her skin. You believe strength lies in the purity of your own form. But survival lies in reception. Your world has teeth. So did mine. But his world taught me how to bite back. Behind mirrored glass, psychologists took notes. Sociologists adjusted their predictive models. But none could quantify the fusion they saw. The way she adjusted her stance unconsciously to mimic Rion's balance in unfamiliar gravity. The way he allowed her to speak first, trusting her to command the room. The way their silence felt louder than protocol. Earth's generals whispered concern. One called it emotional contamination. Another worried about genetic instability. But the data silenced them. The units trained under their doctrine, the Predator method, were outperforming traditional squads by over 300%. Attrition rates plummeted. Survivability skyrocketed. And fear? It had become fuel. The real question wasn't, can we accept her? It was, can we afford not to? Rion would say it simply in his post-session summary, logged under classified channels. You don't beat monsters by staying human. You beat them by inviting the inhuman to teach you how to survive them. Aveth'kara, in a private moment on Earth's western coast, watched the Pacific waves roar with the memory of some ancient predator far beneath. She asked him, quiet and distant, "Is your world always this judgmental?" Rion, lying beside her on the darkened rocks, eyes closed, replied, "Only when something makes it feel less special." She tilted her head, silver hair catching starlight. "Then I will make it more." And that was the truth Earth's brass couldn't digest. That sometimes, the greatest evolutionary leap wasn't about genes. It wasn't about faster reflexes or better weapons. It was about letting go of the idea that you are the final form. Because true power is the willingness to unbecome what you were, in order to become what you must. The smoke curled blue and gold under a sky neither Earth nor Veritas could claim. It drifted across the winds of a moon orbiting the gas giant Turiel 7, where gravity folded slightly wrong and the sound of crackling meat came with a low, harmonic hum. A fire pit blazed on top of a rock plateau, surrounded by warriors from 5 species, all watching the same thing, the slow roast of a once feared god beast named Krakzan, a legend in 3 star systems, now skewered through the heart and rotating on a spit. The doctrine had spread. What began as survival on a hostile world had become a methodology, then a movement. The Predator doctrine was no longer a secret. It had metastasized planet to planet, outpost to outpost, crossing cultural thresholds not with conquest, but with the smell of meat cooking. Because nothing travels faster than fear undone. The first to adapt were the planet-bound soldiers of Tavalis III. Their apex predator, the Lorzeth, had ruled their deserts for centuries, 6-legged, obsidian-plated creatures that burrowed through sand and impaled with barbed tongues. They had been unkillable. Until a human named Calder Voss brought Rion Cade's training files, sharpened a heat-forged blade, and cut out a shrike's heart mid-charge. He roasted it beneath 3 suns. Ate it raw at first, then added spice. When the Tavalans tasted the meat, they didn't just overcome fear. They started farming the beasts. It spread from there like wildfire across vacuum corridors. On Relo Prime, a televised broadcast aired under the title, "Feast the Fanged, When Apex Falls to Flame." It featured the live cooking of a Thanek broodmother previously classified as a Class Black cosmic entity. The camera panned slowly as its translucent flesh crisped into amber. Viewers tuned in from 61 worlds. The broadcast ended with one of the Rion war priests, once a devout servant of predator worship, biting into the flesh and declaring, "What we feared, now feeds us. The circle is closed." Aveth'kara and Rion watched it together from their high orbital module. No words passed between them. But their eyes held the same knowing: this had never been about food. It was about rewriting the cultural biology of fear. Predators had always defined civilizations. In myths. In policy. In the shape of cities and the silence between stars. Fear had been the compass, the governor, the leash. But now, something new walked between the stars: generations born not to avoid monsters, but to harvest them. Training centers began offering predator conversion modules. The slogan was simple: "Don't hunt prey. Hunt what hunts you." Graduates didn't just carry weapons. They carried appetite, not for blood, but for the power that lies dormant inside fear once it's chewed and swallowed. One of the most watched clips in the galactic data stream that year featured a young female cadet from Gara Station. Her first kill was a sea-dwelling leviathan that had once swallowed scout ships whole. She cooked it on volcanic stones and offered the first bite to her squad. When asked in an interview how she found the courage, she said, "My grandmother taught me to close my eyes when the monsters came. My commander taught me to open my mouth instead." The crowd went silent. Then erupted. Across worlds, predator meat became currency, ritual, even art. Warrior chefs emerged. Combat hunters became ambassadors. Eating what once ruled became not savagery, but enlightenment. But the most profound shift occurred not in the battlefield, but in the soul. Because when civilizations learned to process fear, not bury it, not worship it, not suppress it, but digest it, they changed their shape. Their myths shift. Their children ask different questions. Not, "What hunts us?" but, "What can we make from its bones?" And somewhere deep in the stellar network of evolved minds and open fires, a quiet truth burned hotter than plasma. We do not become brave by denying monsters. We become brave by biting into them until they live inside us, not as nightmares, but as nourishment. The room was dark. Not in absence of light, but in control of it. A dome-shaped arena embedded in the asteroid base of Zariel Fold, where multi-species command units gathered not for display, but for transmission. Across the walls, projection tendrils slithered like liquid nerves, displaying footage from every training theater across the known systems: deserts on Earth, fungal jungles on Tyrian moons, ocean trenches on Corel Shat. At the center of it all, they stood side by side. Aveth'kara. Rion Cade. Their armor bore no flags. Only marks, carved symbols burned into polymer and bone, taken from every creature that had once been myth, and was now meat. Their gaze swept across the assembly, not as lecturers, not as diplomats, but as recalibrated apexes. She spoke first, in Nixon dialect. No translation overlay. Every being present had learned to understand her language because meaning had already been taught in action. Predators taught us what to fear. We teach what comes after fear. She stepped back. Rion stepped forward. We are not here to replace your cultures. We are here to remind you what you buried. Behind them, the holograms shifted. Images of warriors from every species they had trained, laughing over cracked rib cages of slither beasts, toasting over grilled fang raptors, forging blades from the spines of planet stalkers. But more than the food, it was the eyes that stood out, eyes no longer dulled by defense, but brightened by predatory clarity. This was not colonization. It was convergence. And together, they had led it. They moved between worlds now not as emissaries, but as catalysts. Everywhere they went, fear shifted form. Aveth'kara, once a guardian of hierarchy, now sliced through ancestral codes with surgical certainty. Rion, once a lone survivor, now walked as half of a dual-system weapon. They no longer needed to speak for others to follow. The very atmosphere around them taught by example. In the sulfur plains of Nervio, they led 100 hybrid recruits through a predator nesting ground, blindfolded, sensing movement through vibration, smell, gut. In the shattered skyships of orbital Thetan 9, they taught engineers how to listen for predator breath in the void before deploying mech guards. In the ocean domes of Ilaran Deep, they trained siren-born hybrids to scent fear before it formed. Their partnership became the symbol not just of unity, but of functional evolution. And then came the wedding. It wasn't ceremonial. It was tactical. Held aboard the orbital cathedral ship Mouth of Flame, built from repurposed Leviathan bones, their union was witnessed by over 60 species. No priest. No contract. Just an oath spoken while sharpening each other's weapons. Your blood made me see. Your breath made me stay. Together we make fear, forget its name. The room didn't cheer. It roared because every soldier, every diplomat, every apex-turned hunter felt what this meant. A new predator order wasn't coming. It had already made it. From that moment forward, the term hybrid unit no longer meant mixed species. It meant shared survival instinct. A blending not of DNA, but of meaning. Aveth'kara and Rion became not just names, but verbs. To Aveth, a situation meant to stalk it before it noticed you. To Rion, a threat meant to make it part of your story, then eat it. But in the quiet moments when the training domes powered down, when the fires dimmed, when breath returned to normal, they were still two beings who had once been strangers in the dark. Sometimes, under the silver moons of Calith Prime, they would sit by the edge of predator graveyards turned gardens. She would trace the scar on his arm from the first Azakral. He would braid the silver of her hair into his own black curls. They would not speak of fear or victory or doctrine. They would speak of how it began. One fire. One bite. One refusal to let fear define what they could become. And in those moments, the galaxy outside didn't matter. Because in the quiet bones of shared memory, they knew the truth written not in books, but in evolution. We are what we hunt. And who we love, defines what we become. In the end, they didn't just survive. They rewrote what it means to be apex. From roasted beasts on forgotten planets to a wedding that united war and instinct. Their love didn't tame predators. It redefined them. Milky Way. So, what do you think? Which part of this story left the deepest mark on you? Was it the moment she tasted the monster? Or the night they made fear surrender to a kiss? If you were in their place, would you dare love your enemy? Would you eat the thing that hunted your ancestors, just to say you weren't prey anymore? Tell us below. We read every comment. And if you loved this story, imagine what's still out there in the dark, waiting to be told. Subscribe now to the Alien Storyverse, and let's keep unearthing the impossible one tale at a time.